Oh, how I love Harlem. Oh, how I love the Harlem. But I have to tell you, my friends, that Harlem, once the birthplace and the motherland of one of Hamites or the Hamite people's greatest international entrepreneur and developer in the person of Marcus Garvey, who was able to put together a massive shipping program. You might remember and will recall, and some of you may remember your sense of anger when I said that all the years that Africans or Hamites or Canaanites were on the continent of Africa, they never built a seaworthy vessel with over 25 or 7,000 miles of seashore around the continent of Africa. They never built a vessel that they could put out to sea and could sail the tumultuous seas from one continent to the other. Many people had a deep seat of anger and remain angry with me today. But I have to tell you that Marcus Garvey, Jamaican-born Marcus Garvey, was able to purchase a fleet of ships called the Black Star Line, competitive with the European massive fleet of ship called the White Star Lines. That was the mother ships of the Titanic that sailed, and the Queen Mary that sailed the ocean blue so many times. Marcus Garvey, one of the greatest international development and entrepreneurs and also leaders of all time, was given birth to by Mother Harlem. Mother Harlem, oh, how I love you. Mother Harlem also gave birth to the likes of Adam Clayton Powell Jr. You may not necessarily like his ethics with respect to his dealing with women or his use of alcohol, but one of the more colorful congresspersons that, if you want to talk about critical race theory, that Hamites or black people themselves have tried to hide the importance of Adam Clayton Powell Jr., who was really the genesis behind the 1964 Civil Rights Bill and the 1965 Civil Rights Act, working with President Lyndon Baines Johnson. It wasn't Dr. Martin Luther King that affected that. It was Adam Clayton Powell Jr., who was instrumental in passing, while in the House of the Representatives, more legislation than any other congressperson or legislator in the history of that body. And it was during the era of the civil rights legislation and the equal rights legislation of 1964 and 1965. It was Adam Clayton Powell Jr. that did that. But for whatever reason, Hamites have found it profitable to try to give that that period of Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, they tried to give that to Dr. Martin Luther King. Dr. Martin Luther King had nothing really to do with that except to be there. Harlem gave birth to Adam Clayton Powell Jr., who walked up and down 125th Street demanding jobs and businesses for the Hamite people from the community. Harlem is the birthplace of some of the greatest soul and jazz music that the world has ever heard or will ever hear. The Apollo Theater was the center of the world of entertainment. People from all over the world focused on what came out of the Apollo Theater. And it was the place to be seen if you had some musical talents to be presented. Some of the best restaurants found of a Southern cuisine where people learned to take scraps of food during the period of slavery, if you will, or even early Jim Crow, take scraps of food and turn it into tasty bites, giving way to things like chicken and waffles and black-eyed peas and some of the seasoning that went along with it, just taking scraps of food and turning it into a delectable dish. And all that developed in Harlem. Harlem, the Mecca, the flagship, the one place where everybody in China, a 3-month-old, 3-year-old baby, a child in China knows about Harlem. But I have to tell you very mournfully today, as much as I love Mother Harlem, she has been betrayed. And in the ethics or generic understanding of an anatomy or words that gives a passion and deep understanding, Harlem has been raped. And not to be offensive or disrespectful or crude, I'd like to say with the movement of what has happened to Harlem, they have pulled a train on Harlem. She has been notoriously and repeatedly raped by banksters, by wicked and crooked developers. But the person that lifted up Harlem's dress and pulled down her panties, there are two in particular people. One lifted up her dress and the other pulled down her panties so that she could be raped. And then it has been the local pastors of Harlem of old who have held down Mother Harlem's hands so that she couldn't fight her rapist. The person that lifted up her dress, in my estimation, and in my, if you will, satirical, if you must, literary way of expressing this, this is not a reality, but a way of painting a picture. The person that lifted up Mother Harlem's dress to be raped was David Dinkins, the so-called first black mayor of the city of New York, who died in contempt of the black people, and many who didn't even know him or weren't born when he became mayor, but he died in contempt of them because he sold out Harlem and gave it to Columbia University, who then swathed a large part of the west side of 125th Street and the Hudson River and Broadway, where they built billion-dollar buildings over there. David Dinkins lifted her dress. The person who pulled down her panties and took them off of both of Mother Harlem's legs was Al Sharpton, the so-called Reverend Al Sharpton, who the New York Post, in reporting about his operations with the FBI and snitching on drug dealers here in the New York City area, labeled him as confidential informant 7. They called him Reverend Rat. The New York Post called him Reverend Rat. That's another word for a snitch. He's the one that pulled down Mother Harlem's panties and took off both of her legs and opened her legs up so the developers and the bankers and everybody else could come in and rape her with impunity. In my estimation, in a satirical way of my expressing what has happened to this beautiful land called Harlem, David Dinkins and Al Sharpton David Dinkins lifted her dress satirically, and Al Sharpton pulled down Mother Harlem's panties satirically. Now, and the men that held her arms down once the rape began, many of the local preachers of the churches, the preachers like the pastor of the Legree Baptist Church on 125th Street that sold that property to the developers, a pastor like Johnny McGann who sold the St. Luke Baptist Church and its integrity to the developers, and the pastor of the Baptist Temple Baptist Church that sold that church and its integrity, and the pastors in general, that's pastor of the Second Canaan Baptist Church that sold that church, and others who sold church property and promoted the church property, and the Community Board 9 and Community Board 11, if I've gotten both of those community boards right, that did not stand in the way and allowed laws, and the Harlem Empowerment Zone people that allowed these builders to come up here rezoning and ripping and tearing and looting as they went. They are the ones, when Mother Harlem was writhing and crying out in pain of her being raped, that they did everything to keep her mouth stuffed and her hands held, and the rape continued and left Mother Harlem, the Lenox Lounge and Frank's Restaurant and other iconic places of the community. And then there was one preacher in Harlem who was crying, "Stop the rape, stop." And we're talking satirically, we're giving a literary example named James David Manning that was crying, "Stop the rape, stop the rape." And of this beautiful, "Stop the rape of Mother Harlem." And they tried to arrest him. They set him up. They tried to defame him. They called him a hate preacher. They've done everything. They've tried to take his property. They've bamboozled the courts. They've bamboozled the minds of the people. They've paid off the preachers, and they've paid off the local grifters in the community to try to stop the voice of the one crying out, "Stop the rape of Mother Harlem, stop the rape." And I believe, and personally, I'm James David Manning, obviously, but every time I walk the streets of Harlem, and I see what has happened to her, I see how people like Al Sharpton, who I believe pulled down Mother Harlem's panties, who don't even live in the community, pays $13,000 a month, and this is going back several years ago that this was revealed, to live in a building on 72nd Street and Broadway. He don't even live in the community, but paying $13,000 a month for an apartment when he could buy one of the beautiful brownstones here in the community. Then he has that little chicken shack called the National Action Network on 145th Street. And he's trying now to get some developers to be able to purchase all of 145th Street and build a 17-story high-rise overlooking the East River on 170. Now, this is where the so-called Mr. National Action Network, Reverend Al Sharpton, that's his little old rinky-dink storefront organization. Ain't that a scream? Ain't that a cuss? But that's his that's his height of his ability to have an office. He got kicked out of the Wyatt Walker, kicked Al Sharpton out of the Canaan Baptist Church on 116th Street. Even Wyatt Walker couldn't deal with the likes of the CI7 Reverend Rat Al Sharpton. But I'm here to let you know I'm bemoaning, I'm bewailing Mother Harlem, what has happened to our beloved mother, what has happened to her. And I want to see her restored. I want to see her rehabilitated. I want to see her represented and paid for all of the, punitively for all the awful things that have happened to her. I am a crier for Mother Harlem. I'm her son. And I don't want to say I'm the only son of Mother Harlem, but I love Mother Harlem dearly. And what has happened to her? Her streets, her beautiful boulevards are now being trafficked by men, two men deep kissing, tongue kissing one another on the streets of Mother Harlem. And her churches that were once flourishing in places of meeting and gathering and singing and developing are now being torn down and bulldozed over. Mother Harlem, her integrity, her beauty, that once was the beacon light of the world, Duke Ellington and Lionel Hampton and James Brown and so many others, Stevie Wonder, and who came and developed their music here, and Langston Hughes, who lived and wrote his poetry, and Mr. Shaw, who read and wrote here, and all the beautiful people that made this community such a beautiful people that the young people don't know Joseph. They don't remember the great days. But I want to let you know I am standing. I don't hate black people. I'm not a hater of Hamites. I don't consider myself a black man. I am not. I'm a Hamite. But I don't hate people that call themselves black. I'm here telling them the truth. I'm here letting them know that our flagship, our mother, has been raped and robbed and left for dead. But I'm here with the word of God in my mouth to resuscitate this beautiful woman. This beautiful woman. This beautiful woman, this classic woman, this well-dressed woman, and I'm here to rehabilitate her, and I will not rest until Mother Harlem stands up again. And there's a greater beacon here in northern Manhattan than the Statue of Liberty down in the harbor of New York City. I will not stop. And I'm going to ask you to take the time just to listen to me. I don't hate my brother. I don't. I don't hate the black man. I don't. I just tell him the truth, and he hates to hear it. I don't hate the LGBTQ people. I just tell them the biblical God-ordained laws of Moses, Jesus supporting and Jesus endorsing laws of Moses. I tell them the truth, and they hate to hear it. But I want you to know I love Mother Harlem, and she needs to rise again. Harlem will rise again to give glory to the sons of Africa, to the Hamites of the world. Harlem will rise again as I stand before you as the Lord's servant, and I will not quit, nor shut up, nor sit down, nor be ran out of town until Harlem, till Mother Harlem rises again. I'm James David Manning, everybody, pastor of the ATLAH World Missionary Church on 123rd Street and Lenox Avenue here in Mother Harlem land. I'm the Lord's servant, and I don't want you to ever forget it.
And God let me hear the Honorable James David Manning on the radio. And he was at 135th and 5th Avenue preaching there, and when the drug guys said, you can't preach here, you're on our territory, we're going to kill you. He said, no, God told me to come here and preach, and I'm going to preach. And somebody called the captain, and he came and said, take your church and your people and go back. Take your people and go back to your church. We don't want no bloodshed. He said, there will be no bloodshed. God told me to come here and preach, and I'm going to preach. I said, oh, God, that's my man. I called my sister, come and hear this man. Come hear this man. She said, who is that? I said, I don't know. But in my heart, I knew he knew the truth. So I thank and praise God for being in this house.